Welcome to the channel, where we dive deep into the world's most powerful political, economic, and historical events.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're breaking down one of the most significant global crises of our time, the Russia-Ukraine war. What began as a regional conflict has rippled outward, shaping NATO's future, testing the effectiveness of international sanctions, and triggering a strategic showdown in the U.S.-China-Russia power triangle. We've got Putin gripping Ukraine to keep NATO out, Zelensky rallying the free world, Europe sanctioning, but maybe not crippling the aggressor, and Trump proposing a deal that could change everything. Stay tuned. This isn't just about Ukraine. It's a battle for the world's political order. Historical roots. Why Putin sees Ukraine as former Soviet land. Let's rewind in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed and newly independent states emerged, including Ukraine. For millions of Ukrainians, independence meant freedom from Moscow's shadow. But for Vladimir Putin, the breakup represented a historic tragedy. He's described the fall of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. He sees Ukraine not just as a neighbor, but as part of Russia's historic and cultural heartland. In speeches from 2014 onward, he repeatedly stressed that Ukraine should never become part of NATO. When NATO continued expanding east, adding members like Poland, Hungary, the Baltics, Putin viewed that as a direct threat. When talk of Ukraine's future NATO membership started to swirl, he saw red flags. So yes, to Putin it's about more than just borders. It's about legacy, influence, and control in what he views as a rightful sphere. Invasion unleashed, strategy and miscalculations. On February 24th, 2022, Putin launched a full-scale invasion. His stated aims? Denazify Ukraine, ensure it remains neutral, prevent it joining NATO. But many analysts labeled it imperial aggression. In reality, the Kremlin aimed to topple Zelensky's elected government, install a puppet regime, and slow the drift toward EU and NATO integration. Initial Russian assumptions were overconfident. Moscow's generals expected Kiev to fall in days. Instead, they met fierce resistance, volunteer battalions, widespread citizen mobilization, and Ukrainian resilience. Putin's initial blitz faltered. Ukrainian towns held fast. Kiev did not fall. The conflict quickly turned into a protracted war of attrition, with explosive cycles of Russian offensives and Ukrainian counterattacks. Zelensky's leadership, from stand-up comedy to standoff. Before 2019, Volodymyr Zelensky was a household name in Ukraine as a comedian, best known for portraying a fictional president on TV. In 2022, he became the real wartime president. Within the war's first weeks, Zelensky emerged as a global symbol, giving speeches in Hebrew to Israeli lawmakers, addresses to EU summits, and fiery pleas on CNN and MSNBC. One standout quote, "I need ammunition, not a ride." A response to an evacuation offer from the U.S. That moment showed the world he would stay and fight. Zelensky's strategy evolved. Mobilize military, political, economic levers. Negotiate weapons, economic sanctions against Russia, tech embargoes, training. Speak directly to world parliaments and businesses. But defending Ukraine costs billions. Every missile requires funding. Every drone swarm intercepted costs money, time, and lives. Zelensky must juggle urgency with diplomacy and plead for support as the war continues. Sanctions versus resilience. Russia's surprising economic fortitude. To stop the war, Western nations enacted what is arguably the toughest sanctions regime in modern times. Sector. Action taken. Banking. Swift cuts, bank asset freezes. Energy. EU bans on Russian oil and gas. Technology. Export controls on semiconductors, microelectronics. Individuals. Sanctions on oligarchs, Putin's inner circle. Currency. Sanctions against Russia's sovereign debt. Yet bizarrely, Russia has not collapsed under pressure. According to some reports, its GDP shrank, but its centralized economy shifted rapidly. With Chinese and Indian energy purchases, domestic import substitution, and black market workaround, Moscow stabilized a ruble and retained a functioning economy. Some reports even suggest Russia's GDP in 2024 equaled or surpassed pre-war levels, a testament to its ability to redirect surging wartime revenues, especially from oil and gas markets shifting toward China and India. NATO, from protector magnet to powerhouse pushback. NATO responded with caution, but also resolve. While Ukraine remains outside the alliance, NATO countries have ramped up defensive posture. NATO delivered weapons, intelligence, and training without deploying troops. Allies increased defense budgets across Eastern Europe. Finland and Sweden abandoned neutrality and applied for NATO membership. Weapons shipments include Javelins and Mars Patriot systems, huge upgrades for Kyiv. Russia, sensing NATO's deterrent effect, repeatedly demanded a written guarantee that NATO would never expand, especially not to include Ukraine, Georgia, or Moldova. But NATO's policy has stayed firm. Open door for any European democracy that meets criteria. Still, the tension is real. The Baltics resent a lack of permanent troop presence. Poland is pushing for a larger U.S. presence. And Germany increased its defense budget dramatically. NATO is simultaneously balancing deterrence with restraint, steering clear of a direct clash with Russia. Trump's peace offering, strategic pivot or strategic betrayal. Let's tackle the elephant in the room, Donald Trump. In a series of statements and interviews, Trump's stance has been consistent. He described Putin as smart, criticized U.S. aid to Ukraine as endless, and said he will recalibrate U.S. priorities away from Russia and toward China. He wants Ukraine to drop NATO aspirations and negotiate immediate peace, even if that means territorial concessions. Reports say he floated a deal where U.S. mining firms get lucrative mineral rights in Ukraine in exchange for ending the war and effectively solidifying Putin's gains. Critics see this as appeasement, letting Russia dominate a sovereign nation. Supporters call it realism, viewing China as a bigger threat to the U.S. and Russia as a manageable partner. In short, Trump's plan hinges on this logic. If you can't beat them, China, you align with Russia, and Ukraine pays the price. Global power triangle, China, Russia, and the U.S. This war isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a larger global game. China, seeking dominance in Asia, pursuing technological supremacy and expanding military capacity. Russia, pushing back against what it sees as U.S. overreach, seeking to influence Europe's borderlands. The U.S., torn between maintaining global order and pivoting to face emerging Chinese strength. Today, Russia and China stand as declared strategic partners, cooperating on trade, defense, energy, and diplomacy. Trump believes this partnership can weaken, but only if the U.S. severs its NATO-first ties and opens a door to Russia. That would isolate China but fragment Western alliances and embed Russia into a new alignment. Ukraine as the test case. What's at stake for the world? Ukraine is the litmus test for Western cohesion, for democratic defense, and for future regional conflicts. If the world allows a territorial carve-up by force, any authoritarian state could quietly redraw borders, like China and Taiwan, or Iran in the Middle East. Ukraine's survival isn't just Polish or Baltic, it's global. It's a fight over the rules of international order. Zelensky's rebuttal: we will not be a pawn. Zelensky responded sharply to Trump's proposals. Our land, our choice. Ukraine has a right to self-determination. A deal that includes territory concessions is a sellout. He refused to be a bargaining chip to American political expediency. He's rallied European leaders to counter the idea of ditching Ukraine. And in a Ukraine stays for or die stance, he's called upon Western powers to choose sides. What comes next? Outlook and scenarios. What possibilities lie ahead? Trump, peace deal. War ends. Ukraine loses territory Russia holds. NATO vow allegedly secure, but EU credibility dented. Prolonged war. Territory shift. High casualties. But Ukraine holds parts. NATO continues funding. International unity based on sanctions. Russia escalates. They expand further into Ukraine or challenge NATO militarily, possibly triggering direct Western intervention. Ukraine triumphs. With new weapons and unity, Ukraine begins reclaiming more territory. Sanctions intensify. Putin faces economic pressure or political destabilization. bolstered by Ukraine outcome, China tests Taiwan, and sees if West pushes back. No scenario is risk-free. Each has global implications. Why it matters: democracy, security, economic order. This war matters because the world's operating system is changing. Global governance. Will rules-based international order survive? Defense alignments. Can and will NATO continue to hold? Economic interdependence. Will sanctions mechanism remain viable? Strategic coherence. Will the U.S. pivot properly toward China without losing democratic networks? The stakes here go far beyond Ukraine. This is a test for our future. All right, friends, this is more than politics. It's a choice about what kind of world we choose to live in. Should Ukraine keep fighting at all costs? Would a Trump deal with Russia make America safer? Can West hold the line without collapsing under pressure? I want to hear your voice. Drop a comment, share this video, and subscribe if you believe global affairs matter. And if you haven't already, hit that bell so you don't miss the next hard-hitting analysis.